view on the sorts of resources that are being expended on juvenile justice and what their ideas are on how they could be better expended?
You go first, I'll finish.
Well, $300 to $400 a day. That's the cost of holding a child in juvenile detention. A multiple of the cost of holding an adult, and well north of $100,000 a year in putting a juvenile in detention. It would be cheaper to put a juvenile into Harvard, to fly them across to Harvard, enrol them in Harvard, pay the boarding fees, make a generous donation to the institution, than it would be to put a child in juvenile detention, and you'd probably have a better life outcome and a better social outcome, subject to the views about frat houses, and I accept that. That's obviously not the solution, but the solution needs to be, most often the solution that these children require, which finds them in jail being held on remand, is they don't have a home. There's nowhere for them to live. And magistrates, even if they want to give bail, can't give bail if there's no stable home. And the evidence when they did a review, whenever they do a review, and Chris said this, whenever you do a review of the juvenile inmate population, these are children with, whilst 81% to 88% have one mental health issue, a majority of juveniles in detention have multiples, and one of the most recent studies found that more than 50% of juveniles in detention had, I think, 4 separate identifiable mental health issues. Our juvenile detention systems are holding people with no home. They've suffered enormous trauma very often, and overwhelmingly they've got mental health issues. We should be seeing it for what it is, an institution that needs to help these kids rather than punish them.
Only just in terms of the financial stuff, at the moment I'm not sure what the exact percentage is, but it's around 80% of the department's budget goes in, 80 could be 85% of the Department of Juvenile Justice's budget goes into detention centres, as opposed to the other remaining 15 or so percent that goes into community supervision. And so the whole system is focused on locking up children as opposed to providing for community supervision, use of community service. I mean, this is leaving aside the issue about providing housing or at least providing support for homeless children or children that need some form of accommodation, but the system itself is geared towards detention as opposed to community supervision. And I think there's clearly a whole range of things that can be done around improving community supervision and providing good alternatives to magistrates in relation to community supervision compared to detention.
Okay. Next question, please. We've got one here. Charles there.
I'm just wondering, when you talk about community supervision, what does that mean? That's one. And two, when you talk about the accountability, does that include random unannounced inspections?
You go.
Yeah, I mean, when I'm talking about the Department of Juvenile Justice has responsibility for running detention centres, but it also has responsibility to provide supervision for young people who've committed an offence and been sentenced in a children's court to some sort of order in the community with supervision. That might entail a program, it might entail some sort of reporting, and that's really what provides the alternative for sentencing when magistrates are faced with a young person, in terms of what the range of sentences are that the magistrate might consider.
Does that involve a social worker
Or a youth justice officer, yeah. It could be maybe a social worker or maybe not. Unannounced visits is a really important point. And in terms of what exists in Australia, it's the WA Inspectorate of Prisons, which is probably the best example. Now, because they can do unannounced visits, they're a statutory independent body. They work in relation to both adult and juvenile prisons. But also, I just make the point that whatever, the point that I made when I was talking before, that even in WA, where you've got a system that does meet UN standards in relation to a mechanism, you've still got situations where the WA government basically ignores the reports that come from the Inspectorate of Prisons. So I think there's both a process for accountability and monitoring, and it's important that we have the best available, in relation to that. But we also need to recognise the whole political sphere that occurs outside of that, and ultimately it's the political sphere that really determines whether what those inspectorates reveal are actually acted upon.
Well, I suppose if the inspectors reveal something,
You should use the mic if you're going to keep going, but
if the inspectors find something worth commenting on, surely they would indicate freedom of information. So the journalists should be looking for information from under the FOI system.
please give the mic back to Charlie, and then he can handle the audit, because there's a person waiting over there for a while.
Okay, Dave.
Well, it shouldn't have to rely upon freedom of information applications, or now GIPA applications, government information public access applications, to get the information. We actually passed it. The GIPA Act, when it passed about a decade ago, the new FOI laws in New South Wales, have as their primary principle that government information should be proactively released by government. And you shouldn't have to rely upon GIPA applications, FOI applications, to squeeze the information out of it. And indeed, all of the information that my office eventually got, which we obviously, as soon as we get it, we share it, all the information my office got should have been proactively produced by the department, should have been automatically proactively produced. And indeed, one of the things I've discovered in the course of the series of interrogations we've been making of the bureaucracy and the minister is they largely don't keep information. They don't collate information, and that's a significant problem. And indeed, one of the reasons why it took them such a long time to respond to our request, both our request on notice in Parliament, our questions that we made in budget estimates, and our GIPA, was because they didn't have any records. They had to literally go through the individual cases to identify how long people had been spending in Chisholm behaviour management programs, because they hadn't kept it. They had to recreate the data as in response to our request, and that is totally unacceptable. Just quickly on, what is the solution? Well, when we talk about, what is the solution, these children might be violent offenders, they may be causing significant property crime, this is the concern the community has. If a child is a clear risk, a clear and genuine risk to, say, sometimes it's their family or their near neighbours or their communities through violence, there sometimes is no alternative but a period of detention in order to address it. But if the behaviour of the child is a response to some extraordinary underlying trauma or mental illness, well, the detention should be not to punish the behaviour which is as a result of the trauma and the mental illness, but to detain the child, protect the community if necessary, and then address the mental illness and the behaviour. And the Chisholm Behaviour Management Program was entirely the opposite. It was treating the behaviour and punishing the behaviour, assuming that would have some positive outcome. And then any infraction, and the infraction was often a response to that same underlying trauma or mental illness, the infraction was being punished as opposed to being seen to be a response to the underlying trauma. And we need to, if you like, turn the system on its head.
Okay, thanks. The next question, please. Here's your name.
It's Graham.
You've got to turn it on, please.
No. Can you hear me from
You
there?
better yell it out if there's
I've got a couple of short, sharp things. We used to be called the lucky country. I don't think anybody would call us the enlightened country. Is there a country that's doing the right thing in this area that you're aware of? just as a comparison, the Education Department has decided that Finland is the mecca for teaching youth education, and there's a whole crew of people from schools in ACT and NSW which are doing the summer trip to Finland to learn. Is there an equivalent for justice? The other thing is, I guess, the confinement situation. Is there a mix between, well, there is a mix, I guess, between male and female that come up in the statistics, and how does that cope? And will the new trend of LGBTIQ come into play with some of the older ones? The other thing, I'm sure people think of it, whether they do it or not, is some sort of pharmaceutical restraint on people for older people. Well, that would be considered sort of heresy in some quarters, but the people who manage in the corrective system are, I think, invariably hardened by what they have to contend with. And there's one in the paper this morning where a married couple from the correctional services, the lady's in court for trying to buy an executor for the separated husband, and they're both prison officers. So with all that in mind, looking after people is a most difficult thing. The other one, of course, that's gone on and on over the last week is this Lismore Mental Hospital, where the lady was ignored and then died, and a couple of staff were sacked. But so what? I hope there's an answer there. Thank you.
Did you get any of that? Well, I'll answer some of it.
Yeah, I can answer.
And then everything I haven't answered, Chris has to answer the rest of it.
That's why I wanted the mic first.
The Chisholm Behaviour Management Program was for male detainees, and it was just for male children, male juveniles. The treatment of female juveniles is marginally more enlightened. In terms of the numbers, it's overwhelmingly boys and male juveniles that are in detention. I can't think of the exact numbers, about 85-15, that kind of split. But as I understand it, a large part of the recent uptick in the number of juveniles entering the system are girls. And so it's a definite trend to be deeply anxious about. You asked about best practice. Well, it's not New South Wales, it's not the Northern Territory, it's not WA, it would be an overseas jurisdiction. There are some individual state jurisdictions in the US that are doing vastly better than us. And probably other than that, though, we probably would go to Europe or Scandinavia for a best model. New Zealand has, as a general rule, a more enlightened corrective services environment. Chris might be better at telling you the New Zealand status for juvenile justice. You asked about chemical restraints. I would reject the concept of a chemical restraint for a child. I think it would be a deeply unethical use of medical intervention if you were restraining a child to deal with symptoms and medicating them to deal with symptoms, as opposed to potentially a pharmacological treatment to deal with underlying illness. That would be quite a different matter.
Yeah, look, just in terms of other jurisdictions, historically, when I say historically, I'm just thinking about the last 30 or 40 years rather than the last 200 years, but the last 30 or 40 years, Victoria was actually, if we leave aside the last 4 or 5 years of what's occurred in Victoria, and think about the last, as I say, 20, 30, 40 years in Victoria, they've had relatively good programs in relation to young people, and they've had a much lower use of detention. There seems to be a different sentencing culture in Victoria than New South Wales by comparison, where magistrates and judges are more likely to consider and use community-based options rather than imprisonment or detention. They provided better support for young people in the community and better support for young people leaving detention, which has been a huge failing, I think, in New South Wales and some of the other states and territories as well. That is, do you simply open the door of the jail and throw people out, or do you actually provide real post-release support, or through care as the current phrase is, so that people have, young people in particular, are reconnected, if it's suitable, to their family, or reconnected to education, or to employment, or to training. And historically, Victoria's done better than most of the other states in Australia. Moving away from Australia, I think New Zealand, particularly during the 1990s, where they had a very strong focus on restorative justice and youth justice, family group conferencing. They actually closed the youth detention centre at that stage. Was good, but more recently, certainly over the last decade, we've seen increasing rates of detention and adult imprisonment in New Zealand. And I think really, as David's mentioned, the European jurisdictions they don't offer a panacea, but they offer alternative ways of thinking about what we do here. You can't simply transport programs and policies from one country to another, because there's a whole range of differences. There's legal differences, there's cultural differences. But we can look at other countries, I think, to get some ideas about how we do things differently. And certainly, the European jurisdictions in general have a much higher minimum age of criminal responsibility. They have a much more welfare focus rather than criminalisation focus in relation to young people, and I think that at least provides us with some way of thinking about how we might develop things differently. But I'm not a fan of saying, well, let's go to Sweden and take their program and bring it back here and expect it will work. That's not the way things operate really. You need to, certainly you can adapt things and develop things with that. One of the huge differences obviously with Australia, with most of the other jurisdictions we're talking about, is that we're a colonial country. 50% of our kids that are locked up are Aboriginal kids. I mean, that has to be the starting point, and that has to be where we develop programs and alternatives. Sweden doesn't have that. It comes from a different. Not that Sweden doesn't have Indigenous people, it does, but it comes from a very different situation than a colonial settler society like Australia.
Okay, thanks. There's another question now. Your name, thanks, and that's done.
Yeah, Brian Cannon. First, I'd just like to thank both of you for your great presentations. That was worth it. I believe that law and order and the safety of the citizens is paramount when governments formulate policy agenda. I believe the Liberal Party is terrible when it comes to formulating policies that actually increase crime and the suffering of innocent citizens in the long run. The previous government's attempts to bring in 6 months wait for the dole for school leavers, I believe this would have caused a spike in future habitual youth offenders. And a nice reward for spending almost a quarter of your youth at school. Thanks for coming. But I'm wondering, do you think there's a possible link between the government's tough penalties and their agenda of wanting to privatise our prison system? And do you know what the percentage of youth on remand who are found to actually be innocent in the end are?
Okay, there's a good couple of challenges.
I can't give you the innocence rate, but I can tell you that a majority of juveniles who are held on remand, by the time if they are found guilty, and the guilty proportion is a high proportion, if they are found guilty, the majority get a non-custodial sentence. So, held on remand, held in jail, awaiting trial, you eventually get to trial and you get a non-custodial sentence. That's almost, if you like, the description of a broken system. There's potentially, the system would defend itself by saying, well, sometimes the judges will say, well, you were held for 6 months on remand and I'm going to take that into account and give you a non-custodial sentence. There's a minority of cases where that's reality, but overwhelmingly, remand is a system failure. Privatised prisons, Well, I mean, it's people often get shocked about this, but New South Wales has a significantly higher rate already of private prisons than the United States. We're at like double the rate of the United States taken as a whole, New South Wales. Already a big player, and they want to make it bigger. We're talking about what we could do if we wanted to reduce the prison population and then juvenile detention population. Recently I was on a committee that reported on child protection work. And undoubtedly, every expert who's looking at issues in relation to child behaviour, child welfare, says that we are fundamentally failing to spend on early intervention. And that failure to spend on early intervention is seeing children and families cycle into terrible dysfunction and get out of control. And often our child protection system only intervenes on the 6th or the 7th or the 8th report of risk of serious harm to a child, and of course by that stage the child has grown from being a 6-month-old child to a 7-year-old child, and there's such damage and trauma done that we have child removals. Child removals produce juvenile detention, and we have this terrible cycle starting. We've got a budget coming up in New South Wales. We're going to hear about the budget in the next few weeks. I would suggest one of our priorities needs to be that $3.8 billion that's otherwise going to be spent on private prisons. We should take at a minimum $1 billion out of that over the next 4 years and have an entirely fresh injection of funding into early intervention. Maybe 4 years down the track we'll start reaping the financial rewards, but immediately we would start reaping social rewards.
Okay, the next question, please.
Okay. Many years ago I was part of a feminist group that did a lot of campaigning about the situation of the girls in the Parramatta Girls' Home. And it was said then at the time, this is relevant now, that the minister that gets elected onto the caucus for this whole area, and I presume it's Liberal as well as Labor, is always that person who got the last votes to get onto the caucus. So I'd like to know, is that a factor? Is there a factor here about the low quality of the actual ministers? And this is over quite a long period of time. Because if we're actually getting dumb people, actually as the minister, that's a huge problem and might be part of the problem. The other part that I'm really concerned about is that we've got a really powerful professional organisation, the College of Psychiatry, which is also a college of child psychiatry. Now, they've done a lot of work on the children in refugee children, but are they doing anything? Are the professional organisations to do with children, starting with the highest level, which is the medical, are any of them taking up this issue? Because they have actually done something about refugee children. Because we need their voice, right? And also the degree of, the third thing which ties in with that, is there any actual ongoing quality academic research being done about the effects on the young people during their life, both soon after they're out of this part of the detention, but what happens to them when they're in their 20s and their 30s and their 40s? Is any research being done? And where's the role and what is happening as far as these big, really powerful professional organisations who should be looking after children?
Look, I'll try and answer a couple of bits of that. In terms of the last question, I think most of the research in relation to children who've been in detention in terms of the after effects really is done in terms of those that end up in prison. And we have relatively good information of that trajectory, particularly a trajectory that involves child protection, juvenile justice, adult imprisonment. But for those young people that are in detention that don't go into the adult system, then I don't think we do. We don't know much about that group, but we do know a significant amount about the group that end up in prison. Just the first part of the question, I think David probably answered in some ways much better than I could, but I would just say this. I had the experience between 2001 and 2006 of chairing the Ministerial Advisory Committee on Juvenile Justice. I can't remember how many ministers I dealt with, maybe 4. during that period of
5
time.
years.
5 or 6 years, yeah. It was 4, all under the Labor government. And the thing that struck me at that time was that there was a huge variety. I won't name them all, partly because I can't remember the names of some of them. But, you know, we had at least one minister who was incredibly intelligent and committed. Here in New South Wales, to young people in detention. We had another one who, you know, put it bluntly, couldn't give a shit about young people. You know, was more interested in the other parts of his portfolio, which were police and emergency services. We had another person who came from consumer affairs, who had no interest in young people. And another relatively young minister who did have an interest in young people, but was only the minister for a very short period of time. So, yeah, all I'm saying from all of that is that there was a huge variety in terms of ministerial capacity and ministerial commitment to the portfolio that they had.
How important is that?
I think it's incredibly important, yeah, in terms of what happens.
Okay.
Well, in my experience in the New South Wales Parliament, the bottom rung is taken by the local government minister. That's normally the bottom rung entry. Under a coalition government, there's often a fight between the local government minister and the environment minister, because on both of those portfolios you get jumped on a lot and you have no power and autonomy. And in a coalition government, corrective services tends to bounce up a bit higher because they think they can have money and power. It doesn't mean you get a particularly quality entrant, but I think there's a difference between coalition and Labor. There is one minister that I would cite from Labor who should be remembered for the work he attempted to do, and I think he showed an enormous degree of political courage, Graham West, which is probably the minister you're referring to. Graham West in 2009 or 2010 actually brought a proposal to budget, the then Labor budget, which talked about a $200 million justice reinvestment package, something in the order of that, and talked about moving money from jails to early intervention, everything you'd want. Enormously well researched, all the data said it should happen, all the external studies said it should happen. Terrific proposal, and he got squashed in cabinet and got completely dudded and told Labor thought it was politically unsustainable. He struggled on for a period after that, but then eventually realised politics wasn't for him and he resigned. That was a loss for New South Wales politics. The other thing you ask about is, academic studies. There's one academic study that I'd suggest all of us should focus on. And when we talk about kids being held on remand, and they might be held on remand for 3 days while they're waiting to get some safe accommodation. Or they might be held on remand for 3 months while they're awaiting trial, or they might be held on remand for 6 months while they're awaiting trial. And then they might be sentenced to 3 months in jail, or they may be released. But there was a 2014 study done of NAPLAN results, the educational results. And that 2014 study did a longitudinal study, and it found every single day, one day, if a child misses one day at school, that will produce negative consequences down the track. And it found that if a child misses 10 days at school, they drop 1 band in NAPLAN from 10 days absence. So just think for a moment, vulnerable kids, struggling kids, mental health, dealing with trauma, dealing with a dysfunctional household, and then you take them out of school, not for 1 day or 10 days, you take them out of school for 6 months or 3 months.
Okay, that's very sobering. Next question, maybe Charlie, you've got one of your own, or this gentleman here, or anybody? Okay, go ahead.
Once again, my questions have tended to be hinted at or answered. A range of questions in my head have ranged from federal-state relations, and indeed even the relationship between state governments and communities, which I'd like to see some development in local government to enable the communities to slot into state programs in a much healthier way. But that, I mean, that's part of the structure of the Federation. The political economy, which you talked about, is particularly severe on this, the privatisation of the prisons and so on. I mean, what is the justice? Not just social justice, but what is the justice involved in doing that? But what I'd like you to help me with is what I find in politics in the pub whenever issues of this nature come up, is that, and I was going to throw in the notion of, I'm going to talk about jobs and growth. Well, I've already talked about the growth aspect, but it's the jobs aspect. And the other quip was, a couple of days ago, the CSIRO had point of science in pubs, presumably including this pub. I mean, what's been happening to the CSIRO is just emblematic of what I'm talking about. Your advisory committee, it seems to me, was an institution of reference and wisdom, and we can enhance those things. But we're going through a period, it seems to me, of a denial of the relevance of the CSIRO. And then what they do is advertise global warming, which doesn't exist. Isn't that right? I mean, we're going through a political trend where these things are questioned without true reference to research and development. Okay. There are two aspects that keep on coming up. I'm sorry to be so long, it's just that this does keep on coming up. That's the educational programs, but also the employment policies of the people, including their pay. Bringing it back to growth again. You know, to have growth in the jobs in welfare areas would really require paying them more. And there's no looking at where's the money coming from. But I'm more concerned about the training and development aspects. If you could comment on that with regard to the problems that you talked about.
Okay, who wants to have a go? So, what happens about the education and jobs for people coming out of juvenile detention?
No, it's of the staff.
The staff in juvenile detention.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think it'd be fair to say we haven't had best practice in terms of staff recruitment and staff retraining in juvenile justice. If you really wanted to recruit the best workforce for juvenile justice, you'd be looking more into mental health training, social worker training. That'd be where you'd be looking, as opposed to your standard punishment-driven corrective services model for recruitment. And I think that is a big challenge going forward, transitioning the workforce and doing it in a way that respects existing public sector employees, gives them guarantees of secure employment, and we don't treat staff as disposable assets any more than we treat inmates in a disposable fashion. But I definitely think there needs to be a translation in the workforce. Whether or not there'll ever be the will to do that is a different other question. The other aspect you asked about is evidence-based, which is really a question about the CSIRO. To what extent is public policy evidence-based? When it comes to law and order, it is almost never evidence-based. Almost never. It's Daily Telegraph editorial-based, it's Ray Hadley-based, but it's not evidence-based. There has been report after report after report, including New South Wales Law Reform Commission, that said we should abolish prison sentences of 6 months or less. There should be a prohibition on putting someone in jail for 6 months or less, because what you do to someone's life, they lose their job, they lose any educational prospects, they have all of the ignominy of going to jail, they lose their social context, they lose their mortgage, their whole life falls apart in order to get a 6-month jail sentence or a 3-month jail sentence or a 4-month jail sentence. And when you look at it from a social perspective, it never makes sense. Don't do it. And we should keep jail for serious offence where they're going to be for a prolonged period of time. Have we ever got there? We've never got close to that. And you could pick every other aspect of the criminal justice system and realise it's editorial based, not evidence based.
Sorry, in terms of just you mentioned state, federal, local relations. I mean, the federal governments traditionally have always hid behind the fact that criminal justice is a state responsibility. That was their excuse for ignoring a whole range of recommendations in the Royal Commission of Aboriginal Deaths in Custody. It was an excuse for we're not responding to recommendations from the Stolen Generations Inquiry, the Bringing Home Report about the Aboriginal children. Potentially the UN Convention against torture and the optional protocol would at least provide a position for the federal government in relation to juvenile justice through the monitoring process, so it may take a more active role. We have a highly centralised system in Australia with juvenile justice being run at a state level compared to, say, the UK, where it's run by local authorities. And that determines the way in which it operates here. And it militates, if you like, against more localised responses. One of the things I've been doing is working with colleagues in the UK, in Liverpool and Manchester, and looking at the way juvenile justice operates there, and it's much more localised. Local councils have much more authority in terms of the way it operates, as opposed to a system here where it's determined, what happens in Bourke is determined in terms of what happens at head office in Sydney. And so there's much more limited responses at a localised level because of that. In terms of the political economy, I've never managed to kind of really figure out how we relate what happens in the justice system to the broader political economy. And I'll just give you two conundrums, if you like. The greatest period of privatisation of prisons in Australia occurred under the Kennett government in Victoria. But that was also a period when Victoria had one of the lowest imprisonment rates in Australia. And other states where there was virtually no privatisation at the time, like the Northern Territory and WA at the time, had very high imprisonment rates. So one of the things that's always, and this is not an argument about for privatisation at all. It's just that those relationships are not always obvious or simple.
But since then, Victoria's population has gone up.
Yeah, but that this was 20 years ago. Victoria had the highest level of privatisation in the world of prisons, but a low prison rate. In other words, what the relationship of the state to political economy is important. The state doesn't need privatisation to lock up a lot of people. It might help if it's got privatisation, but it doesn't need it. And that's sort of, I think, complicates what's often told as a very simple story about privatisation and increasing prison numbers. The second example is one from the UK that after the global financial crisis, imprisonment levels have been falling for young people in the UK during a period of austerity. It's not and under a Conservative government. It's not because they have a commitment to human rights or reducing youth imprisonment. It's just there's an economic imperative to do so, and there's perhaps a simple relationship between political economy and punishment. But that's not always the case.
Can I just
I think the most likely way we're going to stop the $3.8 billion spend over 4 years on private prisons is a collapse in stamp duty.
yeah, they won't have the money.
Yeah, perhaps Kenneth did it because it was pretty cheap.
That's right.
Okay, we've come to 8:15, so I think we will wind up the questions, even though I've got one to ask and you may have more. So I'd like to really give a big thank you to our two speakers tonight, David and Chris.